Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, the Joe behind Joe Gardner, and welcome to the Joe Gardner Show. Today's episode to close out the year is an encore and one that I really loved the first time and again this time. And I think you will really enjoy this one as well, especially here on the YouTube version where you can watch the conversation. Amy Stewart is a New York Times best-selling author, and she's back to talk about one of her most popular books, Wicked Plants. This is a timeless book, and today we've picked just 13 of the 39 plants that Amy wrote about as wicked in one way or another. You will recognize many of these plants, and it's not unlikely that right now you have at least one of them growing in your very own yard. That was one of my biggest ahas from her book. One of the deadliest seeds grows in a pod from a vine that was very prominent in my childhood backyard in Miami. In fact, it's amazing that I'm still here today because that seed could have easily been mistaken for candy. You'll hear what I mean in just a minute. Amy Stewart is a prolific writer. In fact, she's written 14 books so far with over 1 million copies sold and translations into 18 languages. Wicked Plants is a fun and enlightening read, and having the chance to talk about some of those wicked plants with Amy today makes it even better. So let's get started, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side. Amy, you're back, and I'm so happy that you are. And I am so enjoying this book. You write the coolest books, I have to say. And there's how many now? You're up to a good chunk.
Yeah, number 14 just came out.
Yeah, and every one is worth the while. And I'm not to 14 yet, but I know I look forward to the fact that there are a few unread Amy Stewart books on my shelf. So,
Oh, thank you.
oh, you're welcome. So thank you for writing this one as always, Wicked Plants. And what a great subtitle, The Weed That Killed Lincoln's Mother and Other Botanical Atrocities. Who would not want to read this book just from that? So here's the thing, Amy, and I confess I emailed you in a bit of a panic about an hour or two ago. In reading your book, I do my outlines as I go, and I make notes of what I want to talk about. And so to set the stage for those to set the stage for everybody, Amy's book, this book is great because there's a lot of plants in here. I think I counted 39 featured plants that are toxic in one way or another.
Mhm.
And in my outline that I showed Amy, I think I probably had 38 of the 39 on the list that I wanted to talk about. So that's where I said, Amy, please help me because we can't talk about that many. But what ones do you want to talk about? And they were all on my list, by the way, of course, because if I
Good,
listen
good.
to everyone in your book, they're going to be on the list.
Right.
So anyway, all that to say, it's a great, fun, very educational, enlightening read that I really enjoy the format of because anybody that hopefully everybody's going to get this book after listening to this podcast, but as they do, they can pick it up and read a chapter or 2 or 3 in a few minutes and learn a lot. And the problem with that for me was because every chapter was quick, but it was so informative, I didn't want to put it down, which makes for a quick read because you just keep turning the pages, which is I think
Right,
what you
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, my whole goal was to just be very entertaining with this.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, when well, let me just tell you, the way this whole thing even came about is that I was going around in greenhouses and talking to botanists and horticulturists for a book I wrote about the global flower industry. And I'd walk into somebody's greenhouse and they would say, "Hey, before you leave, come over here and let me show you this thing I have growing in the corner." Now, I don't want my boss to know I have one of these, and it would be some creepy, weird,
Wow.
very often poisonous, dangerous, illegal, horrifying plant of some kind. And I was like, wow, you really go over to the dark side after a while when you've lived with plants long enough.
Yeah.
And I just thought, the I don't need to do like a guidebook to poisonous plants, right? Like those already exist. But the stories are what intrigued me. So that's what made it fun for me was I just got to be very selective and only pick plants that had really interesting stories. Like I didn't care that it could kill somebody. I just wanted to know who it had killed. And
Wow.
so it ends up being this quirky little weird book that's not at all comprehensive, but that's purely entertaining, at least for
It
me.
is. And you
Yeah.
do such a good job, sourcing the information in all of these plants and then the stories behind them. I mean, kudos to you for that and your others, but
Well, what I really set out to do was to not like I would go look at Wikipedia, which was still kind of new in 2007, 2008 when I was writing this book. And anything that was on Wikipedia was what I didn't want to say.
Ah.
So then I'd have to go look and go, well, what does nobody know? And so it was like looking at through 200-year-old medical journals, reading really old newspapers, reading obituaries in really old newspapers. So it was all this kind of like, where can I go outside of the plant world to find stories about these plants?
Mhm. And as I already said, you did a great job on it. And one thing I maybe want to talk about right off the bat, because you mentioned it in one of the videos I watched in preparing for this, you mentioned the Chelsea Physic Garden and the importance
Mhm.
of that and the history of it, which has so much more meaning to me now, having heard you talk about that, because I've been there in the last 2 years. I've never been to England until a couple years ago, and I went there after the Chelsea Flower Show.
Uh-huh.
And, I wish I had known what you talked about before I went to the garden. I would have appreciated it even more. But let can we just maybe let people know about that and the importance of that and why that was there to begin with? That's a big story right there.
Yeah, this is a really important message that I think people can get from this book, which is that, plants are living green chemical factories,
Hmm.
right? They're making all these chemicals for their own purposes. They're not thinking about us. They're doing it for themselves, like to defend themselves against predators or for various reasons, attract pollinators, stuff like that. And some of those chemicals happen to be really useful as medicines. And many medicines are like helpful in the right dose and dangerous in the wrong dose, right? So
That's
there's a very thin line between medicine and poison. And if you think back, the Chelsea Physic Garden's right in the middle of London, and you go back a few hundred years and you think about what it would have been like to live in London in those days, and you get sick. You get a fever, you get an upset stomach, whatever. You go to a pharmacist who would have been called like an apothecary. The only thing they have to offer you is plants.
wow.
That's it. That's all they have. And they're either dried up or they're soaked in alcohol to extract those chemicals so it's shelf stable. If you get sick in the middle of winter, but the flower only blooms in the summer, then
Uh-huh.
you got to keep it on the shelf. So you had these pharmacists who were just handing out plants to people and hoping that would work. And usually it didn't. Like mostly it did not work. Occasionally it did. So the Chelsea Physic Garden was a place where those plants could be grown and where pharmacists could look at them and identify them. Because, like, you and I both know how hard it is to identify a plant, even if you have great photographs or an app on your phone.
Yeah.
Imagine back in those days when all you would have had was a drawing or a woodcut in a book that was very hard to get your hands on because books were not so common in those days. So being able to see the real plant was extraordinarily useful for those folks. And they also kept a garden of poisonous plants. So you would know which ones not definitely don't give these out. And so the Chelsea Physic Garden is still there today. And all of those things still exist inside that garden. So it is this amazing experience of time travel to
Yeah.
go to the Chelsea Physic
Yes.
Garden. It also really makes me appreciate the drugstore down the street. It's like, thank you, Walgreens. I probably don't say it often enough. Super glad you're there.
You really did put it in perspective. That was the Walgreens of the day, and,
Yes,
I'll take the one
totally.
today versus then. But how interesting with all the different plants that you listed. But on your list that you provided, there's one that I had, as I said, I had them all on my list, but one I wanna start with just because it's the one that hits closest to home for me, and that's
Okay.
rosary pea. And
Oh,
I grew up in Miami, and this is a pea that is very common in the tropics, and, Miami, it's kinda that. But, as a kid, this vine and this pea and the pods were everywhere, and as you described in your book, they're this bright cherry red with a black tip inside of a pod, and I can't believe, I guess my point is, I can't believe that my mother didn't go down and hack everyone down that was within our block, because they were everywhere, and I never even I'm here today talking about it, so I must have not ever eaten one
yeah.
eaten one because I wouldn't be here now. But they're so toxic, and they were so prevalent in my backyard as a child. Scary to know now how deadly they are. So, just tell us the story on that one.
Right. Well, I love this one because I love what they look like. They're very satisfying little creatures. These seeds they're quite hard and round and smooth, and they kind of remind me of little ladybugs, like they're about the
Yeah.
size and color of a
Yes.
ladybug with just one black spot. But this is Abris precatorius, and so the poison that comes from this is abrin, and that may sound kind of familiar to people because it has been used as a poison in some kind of like international terrorism incidents
Mm.
before. So it is known as one of the most toxic plants in the world in terms of how much it would take to kill a person. But it is very prevalent, particularly like you say, Florida and kind of right around there, also throughout South America. It's used for beads because it already looks like a bead, right? So
Yes.
you punch a hole in it and run a string through it and you can make a very charming necklace. But punching that hole in it makes it easier for the poison to get into your digestive system. It's a pretty hard shell. Maybe I don't want to encourage anyone to do this, but it could be that swallowing one, it might get all the way through your system without breaking down too much. But
Mm.
once you've pierced that, just putting it in your mouth could release some of that poison. And so after I wrote Wicked Plants, I was out to dinner one night with a woman who had 3 strands of Abris
Ah,
precatorius around her neck, like pearls,
really?
braided together. Like what, you've seen women wear necklaces like that. And I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I didn't know this woman very well. It's the first time to meet with them. And I just said, I'm so fascinated that you're wearing that. Do you know what it is? And, so I told her and I said, you're wearing enough poison around your neck right now to kill everyone in this restaurant. And she took it off right then. And I was like, can I have that? And she's like, oh, yes.
Oh, so you
I
have it
still
today?
haven't because I'm
Mm.
fascinated with it. The other thing, Joe, is that it is a good reminder, like you grew up with this plant all around you. We can't really eradicate poisonous plants from our surroundings because, again, plants have their defense mechanisms to keep from getting eaten. Most of the plants that you encounter all day, every day are not breakfast food for you. They are not salad ingredients. They're not for you. They're not about you. We tend to, if something's green and growing in the ground, we tend to think that it's for us and that it's all organic and it's plant based and it's all natural. And we'll just pop it in our mouths. And that's a terrible idea. Like,
Yeah.
the plant kingdom makes some of the most deadly poisons in the world, including apron, including strychnine, including ricin.
Yes.
And so we have to have a healthy respect for plants the same way we do for other elements of nature, like wild animals or the ocean. Like plants are very powerful, and we got to respect that power and not take it for granted.
Your book really was a strong reminder of that to me, being
Yeah,
involved with plants most of all of my life. That's one element of it that I don't think about every day, but having read this book and all just the small amount of whatever's in that plant and the damage it can do really opened my eyes to being much more mindful of how I am interacting with various plants that I don't know anything else about.
that's right. Yeah, I'll go on a hike with someone or be walking through someone's garden and they'll pull off a leaf or a berry off a shrub and
Yeah.
say, "Here, try this." And I'm like, "You know what? I'm good.
Yes, that's my point. Well
I just
said.
had a sandwich. I'm fine. I got a power bar in my backpack. I'll be all right." I don't just put things in my mouth that people hand to me anymore. No, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. In this book, if you weren't that way before now, read this book and you will be.
You
So
will be.
with that, Amy, let's hear about some of the stories that you love from your book and some of the plant features.
Sure.
You
Well,
you wanna start with one is there one you wanna start with?
yeah, I think the most beautiful poisonous plant, the one that I really wanted to grow more than any when I was sort of growing my own poisonous plants was castor
I
bean.
knew you were going there. And it was
Don't
at
you
the
think
top of
it's
the list.
gorgeous?
Yes, it's gorgeous. The Georgia State Botanical Garden, which is in Athens, which is just an hour away from me, I love going there, and every time I do, I see the castor being growing in all its glory, and it's everywhere in the botanical garden. And and I drive by and I stand there and I look at it and I go, "If people only knew how desperate
Right.
the plant is. So with
It
that, please
it
continue.
is
Sorry to
it is
interrupt, but I can relate.
enormous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has these very dramatic dark red leaves. It has these really incredible flower spikes. It's a super cool, spooky looking plant. But those seeds do contain ricin, which I think is the plant poison that most people have probably heard of. And it would only take a few of those seeds if they were chewed really well to kill a person. And it's really surprising how little we know about a lot of these poisons. So ricin got kind of famous in the 70s when there was a Russian dissident named Georgy Markov who was assassinated by the KGB. He was in London. And after he died at the hospital, they found a little pellet in his leg that contained ricin. And this is in the 70s, and nobody knew how much ricin it took to kill a person. And they actually had to do an experiment where they made an equivalent amount of ricin and injected it into a pig that weighed about as much as Georgy Markov had weighed to see if it would kill the pig. Like, that's how little we know about some of these poisons. But people do grow in their gardens. And I just want to say, you don't have to run screaming away from,
Yeah.
just don't eat it.
Yeah.
And you can cut them back so you don't have the seeds. Certainly, people who are worried about toddlers putting things in their
Mhm.
mouths or pets eating things can just trim them back. That's an easy enough thing to do.
That pellet in the leg, did that
Yeah.
did the Russians inject that into him?
Yes, they
Yeah.
injected it on the end of an umbrella. So it's called the umbrella murder because they had an umbrella with a spike or an injection mechanism, and they stabbed him in the leg. And it
Oh.
went into his leg. And I guess he was so quickly unwell that he couldn't point it out to anyone at the hospital. It took him a while to find it. But, here's the other crazy thing about ricin, though, and especially this idea that castor beans grow in gardens everywhere. I was at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and they did this exhibit about wicked plants when the book came
Yeah.
out, and they had a lot of castor bean. And they were telling me that after 9/11, the I guess the newly formed Department of Homeland Security came around wanting to see their castor beans and wanting to like document where those plants were. And they were like, we're just, because it could be a possible bioterrorism agent, we're just trying to keep track. And they were just like, you guys, like they're in garden centers everywhere. Like you can't it's this disconnect between like how the horticulture world works and how counterterrorism works. It's like, every garden center sells these. You can buy these seeds from every plant catalog. The same with opium poppies. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can get these easily. No one can put them on a list and like come inspect them once a week to make sure they haven't been. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So it's just a funny disconnect we have, I think, in the plant world.
Isn't it though? Okay, I'm leaning into this conversation. I love it so much already. What's next?
What else should we talk about? Well, let me tell you another one that's actually a little bit connected to Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And we did this Wicked Plants kind of exhibit thing. And they kept urging me to not talk about these plants as being deadly because I didn't want to scare people away from coming to the garden. Then I got a call from Time Out magazine. So I don't know if you've ever seen this magazine. It's like a tourism magazine for New York. It's like, what's happening this week in New York? And they asked me to write a piece about how to murder your dinner guest using poisonous plants. And they were going to use that to promote the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens exhibit. And I thought, oh, they're not going to be happy about this at the garden.
Yeah.
So I called my publicist and asked what to do. And he said, better to ask forgiveness than permission. Go
There
right
you
ahead.
go.
Like any true publicist. So here's how I came up with how to murder your dinner guest was monkshood,
Oh.
aconitum, which is a common garden plant. It's quite beautiful. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Little blue, beautiful, little spikes of beautiful blue
Yes.
flowers. But it has this taproot that really resembles like a parsnip or a carrot or
Yep.
something like that. And if you weren't looking too closely, you might make a mistake along those lines. I guess you could mistake it for something like parsley, maybe a little bit. And so it has actually been used to kill people at a dinner. So I was like, well, all right, I guess if you are going to really do this, you'd have plausible deniability with monkshood because you could claim it was an honest mistake. And it doesn't seem to really have much of a taste. But also the symptoms start out being kind of like digestive symptoms. So your dinner guest starts to get a little sick, could just look like food poisoning. You put them in a cab and send them home, and then you get on a plane for South America or wherever you're going to escape to after you've committed this crime, and maybe you'd get away with it. But anyway, so yeah, the plot of a perfect murder mystery, I think, would revolve around something like monkshood.
And, as you said, I think there were in that if I've got that one right, a lot of people would eat the root thinking they were eating a carrot or a parsnip, and next thing you know, it's over. Lights out.
Right. And so here's something else that I think is worth talking about. And I'll give you another plant as an example of this, which is hemlock. Hemlock, people really know it as the plant that was used to kill Socrates. So Socrates was put to death and capital punishment, and that's the plant they used. But we see it everywhere, Joe, don't we? I mean,
Yep.
you see it. It looks like Queen Anne's lace. So for people who aren't familiar, it's similar to Queen Anne's lace, only it has purple spots on the stems, but it has these beautiful sprays of white flowers.
Yeah.
And it's in the carrot family.
Mhm.
So it looks really a lot like carrots or, you know, I don't know, maybe what? Parsley,
Yeah,
dill,
parsley.
something like
Yep,
that. Yeah,
yep,
you could
armholes.
you could easily make that mistake. So, after the book came out, I got a call from a guy who had been poisoned by hemlock, and it was so fascinating to me to get to talk to someone who'd been through it.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what happened to him, is he was growing carrots in his backyard, and hemlock is a weed. When I lived in California, I was pulling it out of my garden all the time. It just will show up as a weed.
Hmm.
And he lives also in the Pacific Northwest, and it turned up as a weed in among his carrots. And he harvested some carrots to make kimchi. So like a preserved sauerkrauty kind of a thing. And sure, some of them came up white, but that happens with carrots. You get white carrots, you get purple carrots. So he didn't think
Yeah.
much of it. He made this kimchi that in hindsight he realized had hemlock in it. He ate a little bit of it and then got in the car to drive to a friend's house. On the way, he noticed that his peripheral vision didn't work. He could not move his eyes from side to side.
Oh.
And that was the beginning of the paralysis that sets in with hemlock poison. It sort of paralyzes you
Oh.
from top to bottom. And fortunately, he was able to get right to an emergency room, but he also had the presence of mind to call a poison control center. And this is so important because poison control centers, you got to give them so much respect. They're much more tuned in to poisons, plant poisons, other types of poisons than the ER doctor who's dealing with
Yes.
everything, right?
Yes.
So they were able to quickly troubleshoot, ask him the right questions, narrow it down, hit on this possibility, and they called ahead to the emergency room and said,
Oh.
"He's coming. We suspect hemlock poisoning. Here's what you want to look for. Here's what you want to test for." And so he was all right. He recovered. But it does show you how easily that could happen to anyone. That could have totally happened to me, any of us.
Did he forgive me if you included this in the early part of the story, did he know that he had accidentally put some hemlock into his
He,
dish?
he didn't realize it till the poison control center
Okay,
suggested it. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. He didn't realize it at the time.
That's amazing that the poison control people were able to key out, what that probably
See,
was.
that's what they're so good at. They're so good at narrowing it down and giving a range of possibilities to the ER. And
Yeah.
let me also just say, and actually, I'll segue into another plant here conveniently
Okay.
for you. I'll segue into Sego palm, which is very toxic to dogs.
Yeah.
Let me just say that the ASPCA has their own animal poison control center.
Yeah.
And exact same deal. If you suspect that your pet has been poisoned, of course, get them to the vet right away, but call the ASPCA's Poison Control Center on the way because they're only thinking about poisons. And
Yeah.
here again, they might be able to call ahead, get some information to your vet that will help them respond quicker. But the thing with sago palm is that this is a house plant, so it's a cycad.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of folks have seen it. It's got this kind of very big, round, woody sort of base.
Bulbous base.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bulbous base, thank you. And then these sort of, how would you describe it? They look
Hands
almost like
out.
fern-like, except they're
Yes.
very stiff and rigid and spiky, and you don't
Yes.
want to touch them. In the like in a place like Florida, or actually throughout the South, you can grow it outside in your yard,
Mm-hmm.
but everywhere around the country, people use them as houseplants, and dogs will chew on them or will chew on bits that have dropped off of them, and it's very toxic to dogs. And unfortunately, after the book came out, I have heard from so many people whose dogs were poisoned by sago palm
Oh,
and said, I had no idea. I never would have bought this plant if I'd
yeah.
known.
Yeah.
So the thing I'll say about that, particularly with pets, is that, plants don't come with a warning label.
No.
For good reason, because it's like, where do you draw the line, right? Because really, you
Yeah.
shouldn't be eating anything except the plants that are sold in that edibles section of your garden center. So nothing else there. But are you really going to put warning labels on everything? But I really do think the deal is that if you have a pet who kind of gets into everything,
Yeah.
who wants to taste. Some of us have pets who would never walk further than their food dish for their dinner, right? They're too lazy. But I am a cat like that. But
Yeah.
otherwise, take a look. The ASPCA has a lot of good information about common plants that are poisonous to pets. And it's not a bad idea to look around at your house plants and what you've got growing in the parts of your yard that they have access to, and maybe replace some things. That's not
Yeah.
a bad idea to do.
Not a bad idea at all. And,
Yeah.
there's some very common plants on that list from the ASPCA from your book. There are a lot of bulbs that are toxic, aloe, Dieffenbachia, lilies, nandina.
Mhm.
Uh, and the lilies, real quick, I just last year, I'm planting a lot more bulbs around here, and, lilies was one of the ones I was adding. And, Peggy Ann Montgomery, I'm sure. We were in conversation about it. She said, "Just be careful, with cats," and I've got I've got some cats around here. And I thought, "Oh, no," and so, I grew them to bloom, and then I honestly took them out for fear of one of our cats getting to them.
Yeah. And there again, it's kind of like, do you have the kind of cat that just gets into everything or not? And when we talk about lilies, we're not talking about
Oh, thank
daylilies.
you. Yes.
Yeah. We're talking about the kind of lilies that you buy at the flower shop, like oriental lilies,
Yes, yes.
stargazer lilies, things like that. So
Yeah.
it is what's growing in your garden. It's also the bouquet that you maybe brought home and have on your kitchen table.
Mm.
And yeah, I seem to be the one who collects these stories. Like people will come up to me after my talks and stuff and say, "Yeah, my cat, I came home one day and the vase was knocked off on the floor. You know how cats will
Yeah.
do. And they'd
Yeah.
been drinking the water and then they had been munching on the plant, and it causes kidney failure in
Oh.
cats. And there's not a lot that can be done about it, really."
Amy, did you have any inclination that in writing this book and mentioning some of these plants and their toxicity to pets, that this would be a lifesaver, literal lifesaver to pet owners for future situations?
I kind of didn't. Like, I was really surprised. Honestly, I was surprised that I heard so much more from people concerned about their pet safety than their children's safety. It's, and I don't want to imply anything by that, but it is kind of funny. Like this, it really is a huge concern for people, and but valid. But
Yeah.
also with little kids, like, under a certain age, kids are likely to just put things in their mouth, and
Yeah,
so there is an example in the book with oleander, another very common shrub.
sure is.
Certainly throughout the South, it's just
Yeah,
everywhere on the
everywhere.
freeways, in the parks. It's just a boring landscape shrub that you see
It's
everywhere.
ubiquitous. If ever there was a ubiquitous southern plant.
It's oleander. Yeah. But it contains cardiac glycosides that can stop the heart. And the colors of those flowers, they're very candy colored,
Mm.
red and pink
Yeah.
flowers. And there is a story in the book about some toddlers who ate some. And yeah, so it's something to be aware of. Another thing gardeners ask me about is, can these poisons end up in compost?
Mm.
Which is a great question. And the answer, as far as I was able to find out, is that in some cases, yes. but those poisons don't then transfer from the compost to the next plants that you're growing, like the tomatoes that you might add a little compost to your tomato bed.
Yeah.
They're not going to end up in the tomatoes because it doesn't work that way. They don't
Right.
sort they can't travel like that.
Right.
So, but these are all very interesting questions. And yeah, it sparked a lot of questions from people that I was not expecting to hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's that. And thank goodness for that. What about, I'm looking at your list too. Jimson weed or the Datura?
Well, yeah. So here's another one that is interesting as a garden plant or even a weed. So Datura, for people who don't know, this is in the Nightshade family, and it's those beautiful trumpet-shaped flowers.
Yeah.
This is the flower that Georgia O'Keeffe painted. I mean, I think they're gorgeous.
Yeah,
And
they are.
there's a lot of different Daturas out there. You can buy them at the garden center. They're beautiful in containers. I love them. But they do, being a more of a dangerous sort of nightshade, they can interfere with heart rate, interfere with breathing, cause a lot of dizziness, and at the right levels, and hallucinations, and could kill someone at high enough levels. And one of the interesting things about Datura is you can get a little of the poison through your skin. So it has some transdermal effects,
Ooh.
which is not true of all these plants, but it is true of some. Tobacco's another one where you can get a little through your skin. I was in New Mexico. I was visiting a friend. We pull up in front of her house, and she hasn't pulled weeds in a while. She's in Albuquerque. There's some weeds in the front yard, and they were all Datura, and they were
Ugh.
all in bloom, and they were breathtaking. But the minute we roll up, I'm like, you can't let your kids around. You got to get rid of these. She had toddlers at the time. I'm
Oh,
like, you can't let the
no.
boys anywhere near this. And she's like, oh, it's fine. The kids aren't gonna, they don't play in the front yard. No big deal. But there's so much child safety that we do, the little outlet covers and the car
Yes.
seats and the help. Kids go for a bike ride these days and they get on a helmet and knee pads. You and me,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
used to just ride our bicycles barefoot in the rain, right? Nobody cared.
That's right.
But we worked so hard to protect our kids. And here's this poisonous plant growing all over this front yard. And
Huh.
so I said, all right, well, look, the kids could get this through their skin. Like if they roll around in it, there could be some transdermal effects, and their bodies are little. It's not like a full size adult getting it. I said, so the symptoms you want to watch out for are if their face gets red and flushed, if they're sort of babbling and not making a lot of sense, if they have trouble breathing, or if their heart stops. And then she got it. Then she was like,
Okay.
get out of here. And she made her poor husband spend the whole weekend tearing up the Datura out of the front yard. But it's just interesting how we'll go to such lengths, but then when it's a plant, we just trust it. We just
Yeah.
think it's green, it's all natural. What's the harm?
Wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yes,
Plant
definitely.
plant
Definitely.
style. We I mentioned, I think at the top of this podcast, we wanted to do this podcast in the spirit of the Halloween week, And I
Yes.
think you've got some plant stories related to kind of a Halloweenish theme, right?
I do have some creepy Halloween stories. So one of them is a plant called mala mujer, which grows in Mexico and probably a little bit in Southwest United States too, I would think. And so the story I have about this, let me just tell you the story because it's so creepy.
Good.
Is a young woman, I think she's a teenager. She's on a trip. She goes on a hike and she gets back from the hike and she feels something on her back. She can't see it, but she goes to the doctor and she has a red rash in the middle of her back in the exact shape of a hand,
Yeah.
a handprint. Like, how creepy does that not sound like the beginning of a horror movie to you? I
It
mean,
does.
I feel like I could just write the rest of it from there. But it turns out that what had happened is that probably her boyfriend had accidentally handled this plant, which has, this very, what do you call it? I want to say like phototoxic kind of sap, very irritating sap. Let me just say that.
Okay.
And he probably just put his hand on her back as they were walking along, maybe she's wearing a tank top or something. He just puts
Yeah.
his hand between her shoulder blades and transfers enough of that onto her back that she got this rash in the exact shape of his hand.
Oh my gosh.
I
Well,
know, so creepy.
yeah, it's good to put the pieces together and get the rest of the story figured out so we know what happened, but otherwise,
Right.
that's been a serious mystery. Oh, was,
Yeah, exactly.
speaking of, what about, there's a Hitchcock connection on one particular plant that I think you listed.
Right, and so, like, anytime I can work, like, a Hitchcock thriller into a book on plants, I'm so excited, like, this
Yep.
is exactly my jam. So, this one is actually not technically a plant, but, my publisher was never gonna let me do, like, wicked fungi and wicked bacteria and all those kinds of things, so I tended to, group a lot of greenish things into this book.
Fair
So,
enough.
cyanobacteria, toxic blue-green algae, is something that's probably familiar to a lot of people because it can build up in our waterways. And sometimes we see these signs posted saying, don't go swimming, don't let your dog in the water. We've got toxic blue green algae right now.
Yes.
Yeah, that happens. It's kind of naturally occurring. So it's just a overgrowth that can happen in a river or a lake. And so here's the story. So it's the early 60s. It's Santa Cruz, California. People wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of seagulls crash into the ground,
Yeah.
flying into people's houses, flying into their cars. It's like they all come down at once. People went out with their flashlights to see what was going on. And the birds they were so disoriented by the lights that it seemed like they were almost attacking people, like flying into people, right? Terrifying, weird, unexplained phenomenon happening in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And it took a while for anyone to figure out what was going on. Now, what we later found out was going on was an outbreak of toxic blue green algae in Monterey Bay. And the fish ate the algae and the fish got sick. And then the birds ate the fish
Yep.
and the birds got sick. And they kind of all came crashing down to the ground all at once as a result of this poisoning. However, the Hitchcock connection is that there was this young filmmaker living
Yep.
in the Santa Cruz Mountains at the time, and he was trying to adapt a Daphne du Maurier short story called The Birds into a film. But he was having trouble figuring out how to make it into a movie. And he opens up the newspaper and he reads about what happens in Santa Cruz. And now he's got his film.
Perfect.
And I just think if you can take basically Pond Scum and give that credit for one of the all great Hitchcock films,
Yep.
I'm all in on that story.
Absolutely. Let's stick with the theme because we have, I think the Salem witch trials, that has a plant theme issue in it for sure.
Yes. Now, so this is again another one. This is a fungus, not technically a plant, but it's a fungus that grows on cereal crops like rye and other grains.
Right.
Ergot. So it's basically kind of like a plant parasite of plant disease. Farmers have to deal with
Yeah.
plant diseases. And ergot contains precursors to LSD. So it's like you can get crazy and very unpleasant, frightening hallucinations from consuming rye grains that have been infested with ergot. And the really tricky thing about this is that it survives the process of being baked into bread or brewed into beer.
Hmm.
So, going back at least as far as the Middle Ages, we have records of these outbreaks happening. Sometimes in a little village, the whole village kind of goes crazy all at once. It's like they all went to Woodstock at the same time, but they didn't mean to. But it's terrifying, and it can actually be deadly. Like it's not as much fun as I'm making it sound like. And nobody really knew what it was. So by the time that Europeans started to colonize the Americas, Europe was just starting to figure this out and to understand, like, we think it's connected to this weird thing that grows on grains when it's very rainy and conditions are just right. But here in the Americas, we wouldn't have heard about that yet. So one theory, and it's only one of many about what happened at the Salem witch trials, is we had all these girls in the town of Salem, Massachusetts that went crazy all at once.
Yeah.
And at the time, the only logical explanation for that was that they had been bewitched, because that makes total sense, right?
That's right.
If you look back, it turns out that the conditions were right for ergot poisoning that year. It
Huh.
had been a very wet winter and so forth. It kind of could have been a year for that.
Mm.
And while Europeans were starting to figure out that all you got to do is rinse the grains with a saltwater solution, and that knocks it out, they didn't know that yet in the Americas.
Yeah.
No, it's at least possible that all these women were put to death for bewitching people in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, and all that had happened was that these folks were experiencing hallucinations brought on by ergot poisoning.
Wow. These
And
8 girls.
yeah, but I'm fascinated by these foods that we eat that have some poisonous component to them, but we eat them anyway. And so it's another good reminder of, like, we talk about processed foods and how awful that is, but we've been processing foods for centuries, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, corn is a really good example of this.
Yep.
Like, corn, as you know, is a plant that is from the Americas, right? It's a new world, it's a native crop.
Yep.
And native people knew how to eat corn safely as a major part of their diet. But Europeans showed up and they had never seen corn before.
Mm.
And they were amazed. Here's a crop that I can grow anywhere. It's super easy to grow, it's very nutritious, and you can store it up and eat it in the winter. Like, imagine finding a whole new thing, a
Oh,
category of things that you could eat in the wintertime that didn't require, that you could store up. So they took corn back to Europe and it started to become a widespread sort of peasant food. But they did not bother to learn from the Native Americans. Or it's possible that the Native Americans just chose not to tell them that you cannot eat corn morning, noon, and night and stay healthy because you will get this very severe niacin deficiency, a
oh.
B vitamin deficiency that causes a disease called pellagra. And pellagra, for a long time, nobody knew what caused it. It was one of these big mysteries, but it came from eating exclusively corn morning, noon, and night, which is not safe to do, which is why Native Americans combine their foods in a very particular way. So, but the vampire connection here is that the symptoms of pellagra are that your skin breaks out like in blisters when you go out into the sun
Ooh.
and you can't sleep at night. You're sort of delirious and you're, sleep during the day and you're up all night. You can't digest normal food and you get this very pale, ghastly sort of appearance before you die. So it looks like the vampire myths that came out of Eastern Europe, the sort of Count Dracula myths, were really about pellagra victims.
Ah,
And it was because they were eating this new plant from here that they didn't know how to eat safely.
crazy. I guess
It
I
is
makes sense if it's a new food that you love to eat and then you just can't get enough of it, so you're eating it 3 meals a day or maybe more. And that's
right. Or
probably
it's
pretty
only,
popcorn.
yeah, yeah. It did make me think a lot about Europeans coming over here and how they came ashore and immediately had to live off the land
Yes.
and how challenging that would
Oh,
be.
yeah.
Right? Because native people who lived here had been here for centuries and centuries, and they knew what to eat and how and
Yeah.
when. Us Europeans, we showed up, and the only information we had is if a plant looked like it was kind of related to something we had back
Oh,
home.
yeah.
So, like Europeans thought tomatoes were poisonous.
Yeah.
And that sounds funny now. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, what's wrong with you people? But they were super smart because they were like, that is a nightshade.
Yeah.
We have nightshades back in Europe, and they're, like Atropa belladonna, deadly nightshade.
Yeah.
We have that back in Europe, and we know how dangerous that is. So we're not going to eat it. But I somehow eventually the Italians were persuaded. But even then, the English still didn't want to eat it. The English were like, well, the Italians will eat anything. Like, don't trust them. The Italians were like, we are going to invent a whole new cuisine based on this. Thank you very much. So it worked out in the end.
You just mentioned Deadly Nightshade, and there's some stories or major story there that you wrote about related to that. I think
Yeah. And this is another one about how sometimes we can be so trustful of plants. So, do you have deadly nightshade kind of growing as a weed? It's a low growing plant with little purple
you
berries,
do.
but they can get a little bigger and more shrub like, I think. So, and yeah, so it's one of those. The nightshade family is so interesting because it has tomatoes and peppers and eggplants in it that we love to eat, but it has also has tobacco, and it's got, this Atropa belladonna, this deadly nightshade that's very poisonous. So fascinating family of plants. But this was comes from reading medical journals as research for this book. I found a sort of medical journal article about an elderly woman who would go on a walk every day, and she would pull a couple of pretty purple berries off a shrub and pop them in her mouth and eat them and keep walking. And she just got to where she was more and more delirious and kind of hallucinating. And because she's elderly, it's easy to sort of say,
Sure.
well, these things happen as you get older. But in fact, she was very slowly poisoning herself with
Mm.
this deadly nightshade. And it took a long time for anyone to figure it out, because if she doesn't mention it and if no one else is on the walk with her, how are you ever going to know? But as it turns out, it was seasonal.
Oh,
So it was only happening when those plants were in bloom, like, or
okay.
fruiting when they were in fruit.
Right.
So that's why it was happening every late summer or fall, and then she'd get better again.
Interesting. So
I
so
know.
somebody's saying, "So what's up here?" Because she's not the lady she used to be in the summertime. Why is that?
Exactly. And once you realize it's seasonal, you have to start asking yourself about fruits, vegetables, maybe pollen. Suddenly, the plant world is where you want to look for answers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is when, back in the 1800s?
No, no, this was kind of recently.
Oh, this is a recent one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, the story in your book featured 3 children in 1 weekend who died from eating the berries, yeah?
Yeah, there's plenty of much older stories
Uh-huh.
about people who, because again, they're very charming looking. They look edible. If they don't taste bad, sometimes a poisonous plant will have a very bitter taste, and that's enough to stop you.
Uh,
But not all of them are like that. Elderberries are contain some cyanide until they are fully ripe, and the cyanide level goes down. And that's actually something we haven't talked about yet, which is that plants will move poisons around. In the case of elderberries, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, as the fruit is just ripening, it contains a lot of cyanide because we want to keep the birds away from it.
oh,
We need the next generation to actually succeed. But once it's fully ripe and it's dropped to the ground and those seeds can germinate, we don't need so much cyanide in there. So people will make elderberry wine, but you should not drink raw, unprocessed elderberry juice because there could still be enough cyanide in there
oh.
to cause you problems. But the process of making it into wine or jam or something like that, you lose the cyanide at that point.
Yeah, I remember the story when I was telling somebody I had an elderberry tree in my yard, and I didn't know it was that until I figured it out, and then it was fruiting, and I ate some, and they looked at me and said, "Well, those have cyanide in it." I'm like, "What?" Fortunately, I didn't know. I mean, I just fortunately, it was ripe when I got it, but,
Yeah.
God forbid, I did not know that. Kind of
You lose the
important.
telltale. Right. Yeah. And it is a shame, we sort of lose our knowledge of the natural world, and so those things can happen.
Amy, is the deadly nightshade also the thing that, women would put into their pupils to dilate them or something like that, and they could go blind from that? I recall something.
Yeah, Atropa belladonna, which contains atropine, and it dilates the pupils, which was considered very beautiful. It really opens up so it makes you have this look of childlike wonder about you,
Mm,
which in women, it's considered very attractive to look very, very young and delighted all the time.
sure.
But, so here's another great example of that, though. Angel's trumpet, do you Brugmansia?
Sure,
We
Brugmansia.
all love those, right? I actually know somebody this happened to. I talk about it in the book, but I have personal connection with someone who was out pruning one with bare hands. So, memo to self, like, wear gloves in the garden. But she was out really cutting hers back, and then she rubbed her eyes, and she got some of it in her eyes, and it did that thing where it blew her pupil open, but
Oh,
only on one side because she only rubbed one eye. She went inside and looked in the mirror or something and saw that and thought, "I'm having a stroke."
oh,
Sh She goes rushing off to the emergency room, and, at the ER, if they know what they're doing, they know it's called Gardner's mydriasis.
huh.
which is it's like a thing that happens enough with gardeners that they have a name of, which is you get a little bit of a plant that contains atropine and you get it in your eye, just rub in your eye, and your pupil is just blown out. And that's
Wow.
what causes it. And it goes away on its own. She was
Okay.
fine, but kind of scary.
Sounds scary.
Yeah,
Awful.
I know.
There is one I knew about before reading your book that was interesting that you wrote about it and gave some more information. The stinging tree in Australia.
Oh, yes.
Talk about that one.
Yeah, so painful plants, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of people, when they hear this book title, Wicked Plants, they think like poison ivy, poison oak. That is not the most painful plant in the world. The
No.
most painful plant in the world is this giant stinging tree in southern Australia, which looks like peach fuzz on the
Uh-huh.
leaves.
Uh-huh.
They're these tiny little needles. They're called trichomes, so small that you can barely see them. But every one contains a very tiny dose of a potent neurotoxin. So they get up under your skin very easily if you touch them. Sometimes they'll even break off and kind of float around in the wind in the right conditions. You could accidentally breathe some or get them in your eyes or your mouth. And it's said to be the worst pain that a plant can inflict. And if you really got thrown into one of these bushes and got it all over you, it can be such a shocking amount of pain that people have had heart attacks from just the pain. And the pain can last up to a year and it can be reactivated by heat or sunlight or cold.
God.
So
So
it can like
anytime.
back. After it's gone away, it can come back. So I tracked down the botanist who specializes in this plant because,
Oh,
as you
cool.
well know, for every plant in the world, there's a botanist somewhere who has devoted their lives to that plant. So I found her and I
Good.
asked her about this. And she says that when she's out working in the field, the kit that she carries with her is a hair removal strip and a bottle of whiskey.
Huh.
Because what you gotta do is you gotta put is the minute you're stung, you put a hair removal strip on it and yank it off, which is really gonna hurt, but it might get some of those little tiny hairs out of your skin.
Yeah.
And that is such a painful thing to do that you take a shot of whiskey first and then you do it. That's her advice.
And the
So,
hair removal strip, it like tape, but much stronger. Is that what that
like
is?
tape, but much stronger. Yes, exactly. It's the sort of thing that, you might use to remove unwanted facial hair or other such things. And so, yeah, it's like
Uh-huh.
getting waxed,
Yeah.
basically.
Right. I think in your book is what I made note of this, but it's so agonizing that people have committed suicide to get away from the pain.
Yeah, it can be right. I mean, if you really go all the way full body into it and you don't
Yeah.
have enough, maybe you're in shorts and a t-shirt, it can be
Oh.
very, very agonizing pain. And there's not a lot that anyone can do about it, unfortunately.
And did you write this or did I make note of this to ask you about, as animals are going by it, like herds of horses would encounter it and they would be so agonizing to them that they would run off a cliff and, basically commit suicide
Yeah,
also?
I've heard those stories as
Yeah.
well. I mean, you can imagine an animal in the face of that much pain is just going to start to run,
Yeah.
right? And they're not going to really be able to think straight.
Oh, such a happy conversation.
I know. Well, it's a
Well,
spooky conversation. It's Halloween. We can do this.
this is true. Oh, snake root. We didn't talk about the plant that killed Abraham Lincoln's mother,
Oh,
right?
right.
In
Yeah,
in the
totally.
spirit of the the only thing we're gonna talk about politics here is that we're in that season, and so President Lincoln's mother had a encounter with a plant that did
President
killed
Lincoln's
some.
mother did. And this is another great example of what happens when you are living, so again, our European ancestors showing up here and not really understanding the lay of the land. So here's the deal is back in his time and before, cows, if you had cattle, like you might just have a cow or two, right? That's grazing on whatever it can find. You've just turned it loose in some fields and it's eating whatever is there. So cows would eat this plant, this white snake root, Eucatorium rugosa, and it contained a poison that would make the cows very sick. the poison would end up in their milk, and people would drink the milk and get sick and die.
Ugh.
And this was called milk sickness. And no one knew what caused it for a long time. And so, Abraham Lincoln's mother, when Abe was only 9 years old, his mother died of milk sickness, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, along with an aunt and an uncle. So, people knew that milk sometimes could make you very sick, but people were living off the land. They kind of had to eat and drink what they had, and it didn't happen all the time. So, it was another one of those like, how do we figure out what causes this? Another interesting thing about that story, though, I'll tell you, is that they start figuring it out in other parts of the country. So, like in the Chicago newspapers, they were figuring out what causes milk sickness. News had not reached folks in Atlanta or in Kentucky yet. So, the hero of this story is the USDA and those farmers' bulletins that get sent out.
Yeah.
That was how news got out to farmers about how to grow food safely and economically. And it was sort of like the social media of the day. Here's how we're going to get the word out. They'd send out those farmers' bulletins and let farmers know. And so they're really the unsung hero of actually a lot of stories in this book, doing incredible scientific research and then disseminating that very necessary information.
How interesting.
Yeah.
I think that was all the ones on my list that you had provided. Did I miss one? Because those are all incredible stories.
No, you did a good list. I think these plants are fascinating. I enjoyed growing them. I had a little poison garden for a while
Yeah.
on my own at my house, which was a lot of fun because some of these plants are hard to come by. You can't walk into a garden center and ask for mandrake. But someone offered me some, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to grow mandrake. Like that sounds amazing. So it is very intriguing to grow these sorts of plants when you can get them. And I made like a spooky goth garden with like
Yes.
tombstones and skeletons, and I had a lot of fun with it. But it was not super practical because how many people are you really going to poison? Probably not too many. So, it became a cocktail garden later on, which turned out to be much more useful to me. But still, it was fun to dabble in a poison garden.
Yeah, that was fun to see. I'm glad you included a little peek of that in your the video that had referenced earlier, and hopefully we'll put a link in there and people can watch that also and get a taste of that. Man, you mentioned mandrake, but I don't think that was one of the ones we talked about in our list, did we?
We didn't talk about mandrake, but it's another nightshade. So
Yeah.
it's also one that causes hallucinations and so forth.
Okay.
But the thing about mandrake is it has this carrot-like root that often looks like a human, sort of a strange, mangled-looking human. So there's all these old legends about you pull a mandrake out and it screams.
Oh, that's right. The
I can
screaming.
promise you that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was sort of one of those like Middle Ages
Yeah.
witch brew kind of things. It's not a super attractive plant to grow because it's just like a little rosette of leaves, and if you're lucky, it'll bloom. I could never get mine to bloom,
Okay.
but I was super intrigued to be able to grow one.
Yeah. Yeah. So no screaming though.
No screaming.
Yeah, I was wondering how that worked because I read about that and I said, I'd never heard of that before, but okay, now I know.
A lot of myths and misinformation in the plant world, as we both know, including
And otherwise.
yes.
Amy, thank you so much for this. Such a pleasure again. And there's a few more books we're going to have to cover to keep this fun conversation going, if that's okay with you.
I would love to. It's great to see you again. Thank you.
Likewise, likewise. All right, with that, I'll say goodbye for now and look forward to sharing this with everybody. I know they're going to enjoy it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that was a very interesting bit of history on deadly plants, and I'm so glad that Amy Stewart was the one who wrote this book. Beyond being a very talented writer, her research is top-notch as well, and you may recall us talking about that at the beginning of the podcast, about all the different ways she went to researching the details of the book, and I love what she said about wanting it to include nothing that was already in Wikipedia. Last week, I had a request for you. Since we were about 6 months into putting these podcasts into videos on YouTube, we're still working out the style and some of the nuances and things to make it better or maybe to cut out if we need to. But anyway, I'm interested in your feedback on this. So I would love for you to, in the comments, just let us know what you think. Do you like the style with it? Mainly the side-by-side view with me interviewing the guest and you see both of us at the same time throughout the entire podcast? Or would you prefer to have the camera focus on just the person speaking at the time? And that way it's going to alternate back and forth between whoever's speaking. Just a minor style change, but it's good to know what you prefer. And then anything else to add, to enhance it that you'd like to see, or anything we're doing now that you could do without. That would help too. And I'm open to everything you have to say. So if you don't mind, just leave that information in the comments. And I really thank you in advance for doing that. We're all about making this the best experience possible. So with your input, we're going to get there. Also, just last week, I posted a video that's getting a lot of interest here on the channel, and it's related to my big new raised bed rebuild project. We brought in my TV production team for that. And it's a behind-the-scenes look at the story of how this project started from literally a demolition of my existing raised bed garden of 14 years to a total rebuild and replacement of new beds in a very different look from the original ones. We take you through the steps of creating the new beds and the hurdles along the way. And the bonus is we have a free download of the plans that includes a spreadsheet of the plans that you can input your own information, and it will calculate the cost for what you want to build with the style that we built, and it will tell you everything you need from the amount of size and lumber, the quantity of screws and the size of those, and even how much soil that you'll need to fill the number of beds that you're building. And a huge shout out to David Park, my friend, for creating this incredible resource. So that's going to do it for today. Thanks as always to Amy Prentice, Brendan O'Reilly, and Christine LaFond for their help getting this podcast ready to go every week. And thank you for joining me today. My goal for every episode is to help you take the guesswork out of gardening by teaching you the why-do behind the how-to so that you can become a better, smarter, more confident gardener. I'll be back here again next Thursday for another episode of The Joe Gardener Show, and I look forward to having you right back here to join me for that. Until then, have a great week, take care, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here really soon.